In August 1941, during the early months of Operation Barbarossa, the German army was advancing rapidly through the Soviet Union. German armored divisions had already smashed through large sections of the Red Army's defenses, capturing enormous territories and pushing deep into Soviet land. The German strategy relied heavily on speed and coordination. Panzer divisions moved quickly along narrow roads and through forests, bypassing resistance whenever possible and striking deep into enemy territory before Soviet forces could organize a defense. For many German commanders, the campaign appeared to be unfolding exactly as planned. Entire Soviet units were collapsing under the pressure of the invasion, and the Wehrmacht was gaining ground every day. Yet the advance into the Soviet Union was also beginning to stretch German supply lines and expose armored columns to unexpected threats along the vast network of roads that cut through forests and villages. One of those roads ran near the small settlement of Krasnogvardeysk, not far from Leningrad. It was along this quiet route that a Soviet tank commander named Zinoviy Kolobanov prepared to face one of the most remarkable armored encounters of the entire war. Kolobanov was an experienced officer who had already served in earlier campaigns before the German invasion. Unlike many inexperienced commanders who had been rushed into battle during the chaotic early weeks of the war, Kolobanov had spent years training with armored units. By the summer of 1941, he had been assigned command of a small group of heavy tanks belonging to the Soviet KV-1 series. The KV-1 was a formidable machine for its time. Its thick armor was designed to withstand heavy fire, and its powerful gun could destroy enemy vehicles at significant distances. German crews encountering the KV-1 for the first time were often shocked by how difficult it was to destroy. While many Soviet tanks were vulnerable to German anti-tank weapons, the KV-1 could absorb multiple hits without being disabled. For Kolobanov, this advantage presented a rare opportunity to slow the German advance. As reports reached Soviet commanders about German armored units moving along the roads toward Leningrad, Kolobanov was ordered to block one of the key routes leading toward the city. His mission was simple in theory, but extremely dangerous in practice: stop the German tanks long enough to delay their advance. Kolobanov understood immediately that a direct confrontation with a large German armored force would be suicidal. His unit consisted of only a handful of KV-1 tanks, while the German advance was expected to involve far more vehicles supported by our infantry and artillery. Instead of attempting to meet the Germans head-on in open ground, Kolobanov carefully studied the terrain around the road where he planned to make his stand. The area was surrounded by marshy fields and dense forest, which meant that any armored vehicles traveling through the region would be forced to remain on the narrow roadway. If German tanks entered this stretch of road without realizing they were being watched, they could be trapped in a deadly ambush. Kolobanov selected positions where his tanks could remain hidden while still covering the road with their guns. The heavy KV-1s were carefully concealed behind earth embankments and vegetation so that only their turrets were visible. The plan relied on patience and precision. The Soviet crews would wait until the German column moved fully into the trap before opening fire. Once the first and last vehicles were destroyed, the remaining tanks would have no room to maneuver or escape. It was a risky strategy that required perfect timing and calm under pressure. For hours, Kolobanov and his crew waited inside their steel machines as the summer heat filled the cramped interiors of the tanks. Engines were kept quiet to avoid detection, and every crew member remained alert for the sound of approaching engines. Eventually, That sound arrived. In the distance, the rumble of German armored vehicles could be heard moving steadily toward the roadblock. Through the periscopes of his KV-1, Kolobanov could see the first German tanks appearing along the road. The ambush he had prepared for hours was about to begin. As the sound of engines grew louder, Zinoviy Kolobanov and his crew remained completely still inside their concealed KV-1 tank. The Soviet ambush depended entirely on surprise. If the German force realized they were entering a trap too early, they could quickly scatter, return fire, or call for support. Through the narrow viewing devices inside the turret, Kolobanov carefully watched the road ahead. Soon, the first German tanks came into view. One by one, the vehicles rolled along the narrow road, moving confidently through the countryside as they advanced toward Soviet territory. The German crews had little reason to suspect danger. In the early months of Operation Barbarossa, German armored units had often moved rapidly through Soviet positions with relatively little resistance. Many Soviet formations had collapsed under the initial shock of the invasion, allowing German columns to push forward almost without interruption. But this road was different. The marshy terrain on both sides of the road forced the German tanks to stay in a tight formation, leaving them vulnerable if they encountered a well-prepared defense. Kolobanov waited patiently as more German vehicles entered the kill zone. The Soviet commander knew that timing would determine everything. If he opened fire too soon, the rest of the column might escape. If he waited too long, the Germans might notice something unusual along the roadside. Finally, the moment arrived. The lead German tank had moved directly into the center of the ambush, while more vehicles followed closely behind it. Kolobanov gave the order to fire. The powerful gun of the KV-1 roared to life, sending a shell directly into the leading German tank. The impact was immediate and devastating. The vehicle erupted in smoke and flames, blocking the narrow road. Before the German crews had time to understand what was happening, Kolobanov quickly ordered his gunner to target the last vehicle in the column. Another shell thundered down the road, striking the rear tank and disabling it as well. In a matter of seconds, the German formation had been trapped between two burning vehicles. The road was now completely blocked, leaving the remaining tanks with almost no room to maneuver. Confusion spread through the German column as crews attempted to identify the source of the attack. Some tanks tried to turn their turrets toward the surrounding fields, while others attempted to reverse along the road to escape the trap. But the Soviet ambush had been carefully prepared. Kolobanov's tank was positioned in a concealed firing position that made it extremely difficult for the German crews to locate him. As the smoke from the first destroyed tanks drifted across the road, Kolobanov calmly directed his gunner to begin targeting the vehicles trapped in the middle of the column. One after another, shells slammed into the German tanks. Some vehicles were struck in their thinner side armor, while others were disabled when shells hit their tracks or engines. The thick armor of the KV-1 protected Kolobanov's tank from return fire, as German shells bounced harmlessly off its heavy plating. The battlefield had transformed into a deadly shooting gallery. The German column had advanced confidently along the road only minutes earlier. Now it was trapped, exposed, and under relentless fire from a Soviet tank commander who had turned a narrow road into a devastating ambush. Within minutes, the quiet countryside had turned into a violent and chaotic battlefield. Thick smoke rose from the first two German tanks that had been destroyed, and the narrow road quickly became crowded with burning vehicles, shattered metal, and crews scrambling for cover. Inside the Soviet KI-1, Zinoviy Kolobanov remained calm as he continued directing the fire of his gunner. Each shot had to count. The German column was now trapped between the wrecks of the first and last vehicles, leaving the remaining tanks unable to maneuver freely. Kolobanov understood that hesitation could allow the German crews to reorganize or call for reinforcements. The heavy gun of the KV-1 fired again and again, sending powerful shells directly into the trapped vehicles. One German tank attempted to push forward through the wreckage blocking the road, but a well-placed shot from Kolobanov's gun struck the vehicle before it could escape. Another tank attempted to reverse away from the ambush, only to crash into the disabled vehicle behind it. With each passing minute, the column became more disorganized. German crews inside their tanks struggled to identify where the Soviet fire was coming from. The camouflage and careful positioning of Kolobanov's tank made it extremely difficult to locate. The KV-1 had been placed in a hull-down position behind a concealed embankment, exposing only the turret while protecting the rest of the tank's body. From this position, Kolobanov's crew could fire repeatedly while presenting a much smaller target to the enemy. German tanks began firing in multiple directions, hoping to hit the Soviet position through sheer volume of fire. Shells struck the ground around Kolobanov's tank and occasionally hit the KV-1's thick armor, but the heavy plating absorbed the impacts. The Soviet tank rocked with each hit, yet the armor held firm. As the firefight intensified, Kolobanov continued issuing precise commands to his crew. His gunner methodically selected targets among the trapped German vehicles, while the loader worked rapidly to feed new shells into the cannon. Each successful hit added another burning wreck to the road. The battlefield became increasingly difficult for the German crews to navigate. Flames and smoke from the destroyed tanks reduced visibility, and the narrow road offered almost no room for movement. Some German tank commanders attempted to drive their vehicles off the road into the surrounding fields, hoping to escape the trap. But the marshy terrain quickly proved disastrous for heavy vehicles. Several tanks became stuck in the soft ground, leaving them exposed targets for Kolobanov's gun. Other crews abandoned their damaged tanks entirely and attempted to flee into the surrounding forest. Throughout the engagement, Kolobanov's KV-1 continued firing with remarkable accuracy. The Soviet commander carefully controlled the pace of the attack, ensuring that the German column remained trapped and unable to regroup. The ambush that had been planned hours earlier was now unfolding exactly as he had intended. One by one, the German vehicles that had confidently entered the road were being destroyed or disabled. What had begun as a routine advance for the German armored force had suddenly turned into a disaster. The Soviet KV-1 had transformed a quiet stretch of road into a deadly bottleneck where even superior numbers offered little advantage. As the smoke thickened and the sound of gunfire echoed across the fields, Kolobanov's crew continued their relentless attack, determined to eliminate every remaining tank in the column before help could arrive. As the battle continued, the intensity of the firefight reached a level that few tank crews had ever experienced. German tanks trapped along the road began concentrating their fire on the area where they believed the Soviet KV-1 might be hidden. Shells slammed into the ground, trees and embankments surrounding Kolobanov's position, sending dirt and fragments flying across the battlefield. Inside the Soviet tank, the crew could hear the deafening clang of metal each time a German shell struck the armor. The impacts shook the vehicle violently, but the KV-1's thick armor continued to absorb the blows. German anti-tank rounds that might have destroyed lighter vehicles simply bounced off the heavy plating or failed to penetrate. For Kolobanov and his crew, this armor advantage became the key to surviving the encounter. While the German tanks struggled to locate their enemy, the Soviet crew remained hidden and continued firing carefully aimed shots at the trapped vehicles along the road. Each shell fired by the KV-1 added another wreck to the growing line of destroyed German tanks. Flames rose from several vehicles as ammunition inside them began to detonate, sending bursts of smoke and sparks into the air. The road that had once been clear only minutes earlier was now filled with burning machines and scattered debris. German crews inside the remaining vehicles faced a terrifying situation. They were trapped in a narrow corridor of destruction with little room to maneuver and no clear target to return fire against. Some commanders attempted desperate moves, trying to force their tanks through the wreckage blocking the road, but the burning vehicles made it nearly impossible to pass. Others tried to push into the surrounding fields, only to find their tracks sinking into the soft, marshy ground. Every attempt to escape only created new targets for Kolobanov's gunner. Despite the chaos unfolding around him, Kolobanov continued directing the battle with remarkable discipline. Inside the KV-1's cramped turret, the crew worked with practiced efficiency. The loader lifted heavy shells into position while the gunner adjusted the sights for each new target. Kolobanov himself monitored the battlefield through the observation devices, identifying which vehicles still posed a threat. The Soviet commander understood that time remained a critical factor. German reinforcements could arrive at any moment if nearby units heard the fighting. The ambush had to be completed before additional forces could intervene. One by one, the remaining German tanks were engaged and destroyed. Some were hit directly by armor-piercing shells, while others were disabled when their tracks or engines were struck. With each successful shot, the battlefield grew quieter as fewer German guns remained capable of firing. Eventually, the once powerful armored column that had entered the road was reduced to a long line of smoking wrecks. The engagement had lasted far longer than most tank battles of the time, yet the KV-1 had endured the punishment. After the fighting ended, Kolobanov's tank was found to have been struck dozens of times by enemy shells. Many of the impacts had left visible dents or scars in the armor, but none had managed to break through the heavy plating. When the smoke finally cleared, the result of the ambush became clear. A single Soviet tank crew had halted and destroyed nearly an entire German armored formation. The road that had been intended as a path for German advance had instead become a graveyard of shattered vehicles, proving that careful planning, patience, and the right machine could turn the tide of battle even against overwhelming odds.